Divine Source, Great Spirit, we call on you this day, asking that you shine your light through our hearts and our minds. We're here for the healing. We're here to know you more deeply, ourselves, and to be freed of all restrictions in mind and heart, to be able to flow with your grace and your guidance in every moment. Please speak to us and through us. We're grateful to be here, and so it is.
Welcome to Talking Spirit. My name is Yuta.
And my name's Elizabeth.
And we're once again coming together in this prayer to be shown how to be most helpful here. And it feels like it's been a couple of days that we've been sort of in this prayer around what wants to be said and, which topic do we want to cover, because there's so much we could be talking about. But it seems that we've been guided to share about this idea of exposing the darkness to the light. And I think we'll just talk about, how necessary it is, and perhaps also, what's the best avenue for even going about exposing the darkness, exposing these secrets, exposing whatever we feel like we would like to actually stay hidden. Yeah, and I think just go into some of the nuances around this topic, and maybe also our experiences with it ourselves, because that's what we always do. And yeah, I think it's a really good one to get into, because I think there's a lot of fear around this, even just approaching the idea that there could be darkness hidden somewhere within oneself that will need to get exposed in order for us to really find out who we are, and in order for us to be happy and reach the goal of this sort of awakening journey. And yeah, we were talking a little bit too around, sometimes awakening is also called illumination. And I think that's a really nice word as a symbol for what this is all about, because yeah, we really just want the light of the spirit to shine into our minds and really illuminate all the dark corners that we have in there, and yeah, retranslate everything that we think is darkness into the light, and yeah, experience that illumination. So I think there's much that we can get into. So what comes to mind for you first, Elizabeth?
So, yeah, I was having a number of things flowing through this morning. And one thing that Yuta and I spoke about was this idea of confession. And I was thinking about how, as a child, didn't really have a religious or spiritual upbringing the way some people in my life have. But I've always loved the way people worship and the container that might be available to people that consider themselves religious or to have a spiritual path. I always found fascinating. And I loved, no matter what container I learned about, I loved it. You're Jewish, you have it this way. You're a Catholic, you do it this way. You're, a nature-based sort of spirituality. This is how you do it there. I always loved it. And I didn't have an experience that I learned from some of my friends that they had of like this idea of going for confession. But throughout my journey, I've seen that pretty much every path has a way of talking about that idea and the need for it and the value of it. And when I lived in Manhattan, I worked at one point on 34th Street, and I lived on 34th Street, had this whole like Miracle on 34th Street kind of vibe in my life at that time. And I was near two churches that I really loved. And I would often go and just sit in the church, in the back of the church at lunchtime. Or if I was, coming from the subway or something, I might pop in, light a candle, say a prayer. That's not my religious upbringing, but I love places of worship. And when I was a kid, I lived near a place called Our Lady of Czestochowa. And it was a big religious organization and church, and they had a place where you could go and do prayers and light candles. And I always could feel the dumping in that prayer room of the call for healing, the call for help to be enlisted to assist somebody, you know. And when I would go into the church where there were confessional booths, I would just often sit there, you know, lots of rows, could just sit and pray and meditate. And I would see people going in and out of the stalls. I've never done that kind of confession, but I have certainly given voice many, many, many times to others about things that were weighing on my heart or on my mind. And I've also received so-called confessions from other people. And it was generally people either just getting on their path with a lot to dump and a lot of confusion and a lot of muckiness and a lot of guilt, shame, regret. And then I've worked with people over the years who have a little more awareness of themselves and the way their minds work, but still found it was really vital to offer up to the spirit and to the light and to another seeming person a story that was really bogging them down. And we're always coming back to like, what's the purpose? You know, we can't be in a channel with the spirit, being guided by the spirit, if we can't hear the spirit. And all the guilt, shame, and regret and thought forms and beliefs and attitudes and opinions, they all block the light of truth out. And so this idea of confession, you know, we might think of it when we hear that word. For me, it's kind of a heavy word. It can feel like, you know, I'm dragging around my bag of really dark stuff, which can be the case. But confession can also just be like, hey, I really don't feel so hot today. You know, it can be really deep, deep dive into the mind, or it can just be a little more of a quick inventory of what's really going on. So this getting to know ourselves, know thyself, is a deep look in the mind. And the value of having somebody to sit with, particularly when we're dealing with really dark, heavy stuff, it's priceless. And it really allows us to have a loving force and a loving figure in our minds made manifest potentially in a person outside of ourselves. So, yeah, I mean, there's a million things more I could say, but that's kind of what is here to get us started on my side of it. So what's that bringing up for you, Yuta?
Yeah, well, I think I'm just remembering when I first started out on this path, as we know, as I've shared before, it was the Course of Miracles that kind of brought me into this whole spiritual awakening journey, and it's it's a book that really hammers it in that there is darkness in the mind that needs to be exposed. There's sort of this hidden guilt that's in the mind that has to be seen and given over to the spirit and let it be retranslated. But when I first started reading all of that stuff, I thought, what are you talking about? I don't get it. Like I don't see it. I don't see what you're talking about. I don't see all this darkness because my mind feels pretty light. Like I'm happy and, mm, bouncy. And, I just want to kind of have this happy little life. So that was kind of the initial layer. And then as I, kind of took my steps as they felt appropriate, it got really it got clearer and clearer what it was even talking about. What is this darkness and how does it play out in day-to-day life? And really quickly, I saw it everywhere. I felt like there was so much darkness all of a sudden, and it was just coming out or, bubbling up, and I didn't want it to come out because, like, I'm just thinking back, like, I was working at a nanny at the time, and just like the anger that would come up around the children not really doing what you would want them to do. But of course, like, I'm not like, I could feel I wasn't really angry with the children. There was just something was getting triggered in my mind that felt so dark, and I didn't know what to do with it. It was like it was really tough because obviously, like, I loved those kids. They were the most adorable little things. I was talking German with them most of the time because they had a German dad, and that's basically what I was hired for, to be this German nanny for them. And most of the time it was great, but like I'm like trying to apply the teachings of the path that seems to have presented itself to me, A Course in Miracles. And, I'm what's like, for example, like I'm the light of the world or something like that. Like I did not feel that way whenever I would get, angry with these little kids, 3 years and like newborn almost. How could I be angry at them? But this was just kind of like where I could initially see like the darkness in my mind. Like it would just bubble out like this. And at the time I didn't really have anybody that I could talk to about it. So it was pretty difficult because that's not something that I felt really good about, obviously. You know, I didn't I didn't want to make those kids be the reason I'm angry. So it was something that I would rather hide. And actually it was making me really tired. That's kind of the side effect that I was starting to see, like, because I couldn't really expose it, I was getting really tired. So oftentimes when the kids would go down for naps, I would try to go down for naps because I just was so fed up with being angry and seeing all of this stuff bubbling up. And that was kind of like just an initial sort of like, okay, so there is something in my mind that obviously needs to that I need to see. I don't understand it right now, really. I don't know what is making me angry. I don't know what's making me upset, but I do had to like acknowledge, like, oh, there is something here that needs healing and needs gentle, loving care, essentially. And yeah, just kind of as the spirit carried me along this path, I did, find and was given those outlets where I could share in a safe environment what was happening for me. And that's like one of the things that we talked about initially before we hit the record button, that like it's really important when we do start to recognize like there are things that I need to get out of my mind and I need to get them out of my head, and I need a safe place to do so, so that one, whoever I'm sharing it with isn't going to essentially isn't going to make it real for me. Because what's the like because we were talking about this too. What's the purpose for bringing up these things and bringing them out? It is really to release them and see them differently and feel differently about them. So it was really important that I had people that had that same understanding, that whenever someone needed to expose something they felt guilty about, or something that upset them, something they didn't understand, something that made them scared, when those things would get exposed, it was basically a group understanding that the reason it was getting exposed was because we wanted to have a different experience. We didn't want to be right about what we were experiencing, essentially. So that's kind of just where my mind goes initially, like, just this idea that initially I didn't think there was any darkness. And then finally seeing some of it and it being pretty uncomfortable and confusing and really not knowing what to do about it and where to take it, or wanting to hide it, really. And then spirit really kind of letting me find some avenues where I could let these things be seen and be loved at the same time. And that would show me that whatever I thought was so dark about me wasn't really the truth about me. And sharing the darkness was actually not creating more darkness. It was actually making room for myself to realize that there's a lot of love here. And yeah, and that's been kind of just a continuous experience since then. Yeah. So that's kind of where I was going with it.
Yeah, as I was listening to you, I was just seeing like a calculation of of years, seeming years of my life. And my mother almost died about half my lifetime ago, 27 years old or so when I was 27. And I had already been in a degree of my healing journey at that point, but that event really kicked off a deep, deep demand for healing for me. And I was led to a family program is for family members of people with drug or alcohol addictions. And it was a week long where we came together to learn about ourselves and learn about the disease and the seeming side effects and all this kind of thing. And there was so much under pressure for
Mm.
all of us. I think there were probably about 25 of us. It was a pretty big group. And the way they took us through that week was really like offering the pressure relief valve a little bit at a time, so that none of us would have a mental meltdown, breakdown. The
Mhm.
psyche's it's very fragile. I was hearing also this friend that I made through my father. He likes to say men have very fragile egos. He's a funny guy. He's in his late 70s now, and we've all got fragile egos. The ego is pretty fragile, even though it seems to have generated this whole world. So that seems pretty strong. But like how we get taken out of the muck with the spirit is a really amazing dance and really kind of delicate choreography at times. So this thing that I went to do, the spirit took me there, and we learned tools and techniques. I was hearing this. I heard you say one of the techniques we got at that time was sitting in group, because a lot of us came from families where nobody was allowed to speak.
Mhm.
The code of ethics was keep your mouth shut, don't tell anybody your business, don't reveal the dark secret in your family, don't talk about your dysfunctions, right? So in different cultures and different families and different societies, we have rules that have been handed down and enforced often for like, don't go there. And so many of us come to this idea of our healing journey with a lot of that kind of programming and baggage. And so for me, it was a very intense experience of allowing myself to go there. And again, we got tools and techniques like sitting in a group and sharing what we had on our mind, and then having people, to the best of their ability, say, well, what I think I heard you say was that you went to this place and did this program, right? So we would get this mirroring back of our experience that gave us a look at ourselves, let us address like, oh, I never feel heard, I never feel whatever received, et cetera, et cetera. So pieces of my journey have been coming into my mind as we're talking, of how the spirit brought me into a place of trust that I was going to be all right. And yeah, maybe I sometimes shared something that people pooped on, or that they treated it with disrespect, or they made fun of it, or they used it against me down the road. But mostly it was like a pretty gentle, come along, Elizabeth, you're going to be all right if you take a look at this stuff. And facing our beliefs about ourselves and the world, for me, was very scary, but I was really desperate, and so often this idea of will you go there comes purely out of a desperation. And you know by grace, I was led to people that had a toolbox for the moment that was right for me, and I seemed to need to kind of upgrade the toolbox as I went along. But you said something about the course that, that I was already on my journey for a bit when the course came into my life, but and had already been dumping a lot of stuff, a lot of clearing out of beliefs and resentments and attitudes and opinions and old ideas. But when the course came in, I started having what I later heard somebody else say this term, but it's how I heard it in my own mind, was these clearing dreams. I would have these
Mhm.
dreams. I'd wake up out of these dreams, and it would be like I'm in a village with a samurai sword killing everybody. Like that's my dream for like 2 hours. And it was so violent and so dark. And I'd wake up from these dreams like, holy cow. And somehow the spirit was telling me, and I was getting the message that even though I found it disturbing, that I was being given a purification dream, whether it was a past life thing, whether it was just violence that needed to have an outlet, that just was my unconscious, it didn't really matter. I did feel lighter after I got over the initial shock, right? But I had a lot of those kinds of dreams where the spirit was working with me one on one, being shot, being attacked, being the attacker. So the idea, as you put it in some way earlier, of the violence, the intensity of the violence in the mind, the darkness in the mind, when we decide to say, okay, spirit, no, I really mean it. I don't want to just have a band-aid that I'm going to put over my wounds. I want them lanced. I want the pus out. I want them scoured with whatever heavy duty cleanser you got. And then I want it sewn up so that, okay, maybe there'll be a scar, but there's not going to be all this scar tissue under the surface. Like, I really want it healed, right? And so when we say that, when we say it and mean it, even if we back off the ledge every so often, right? When we
Mm.
say it, the spirit will come in and say, okay, let's go. Hallelujah. We've been waiting for you. I was getting this whole, like, almost everyone I've ever worked with or had the benefit of receiving guidance from, there's some point in their life where a running theme is, I want to go home. I just
Mm.
want to go home. I want out of here. That kind of death wish that is this world in a way is also this, like, I know I'm not where I'm supposed to be. Like, I know this world in my heart isn't my home. And that kind of I want to go home sort of energy speaks to this awareness that all this darkness isn't real and true, but it seems it. And we're calling forth witnesses to the darkness in our minds if we don't purify it. And so, again, when we say yes, the spirit rushes in and is like, again, we've been waiting for you to say yes, because we can't force this upon you. It's your free will right to play this dream out in whatever form and fashion you want. But we know that you want a different way, right? I got that. I got that really early in my journey, thank God, because it's kind of been a bedrock for me in my heart, because it has been hard. My journey's been really hard. And I needed to have that real sense, like, something really does have my back. And sometimes I needed to have a hand to hold that was an external expression of the spirit that was in my heart and in my mind talking to me. And so we say yes, we're going to get some real visceral experience for me anyway, of what that darkness feels like. And I found those experiences very disorienting at times.
Mm.
If you've got a lifetime of believing or lifetimes that you can't really remember, where there was real seeming darkness, like so-called evil, right? That maybe you were playing in or that others were sort of perpetrating against you or whatever else. Well, when you're in this life and you're going like, wow, why do I feel really paranoid? Or why do I feel like somebody's gunning for me? Or why do I feel like I'm going to die, right? This is the kind of stuff that we've become so disconnected from, that, as you said, like, oh, I mean, as a kid, I knew about darkness in the mind. That was not confusing to me. And I had lots of witnesses to it.
Wow.
And maybe it's more generational era kind of thing. Like, my era was mucking through some that maybe yours wasn't. I don't know. But I was not confused about that. I just didn't know my way out of it. I didn't know that actually my assignment is to work on healing this, as is our assignment for all of us. Every single one of us has the assignment of healing the darkness in the mind. And so I knew there was the darkness. I just didn't know what the solution was. And kind of big piece of my journey for the last 27 plus years, really almost the whole time, has been going, how do I get out of this, spirit? Help, please help. This is hell.
Mhm.
And so when we talk about the idea of confession and looking at the mind, it's almost everything. It's almost the whole kit and caboodle, you might say. So it's vital. Like, you said illumination, and yeah, good luck. having the dawning of light in your mind, if you're just sitting in the darkness or pretending you don't have it, covering it up. I look good. I got the good hair, the good house, the good kids, the good car,
Mhm.
right? There are a lot of people using the worldly stage to try to prop up an image that will keep them from being seen for the darkness in their mind or from feeling for themselves the darkness that they've got.
Yeah, and I think when you first started talking, you were saying that it's a very delicate dance and delicate orchestration from the spirit. And it definitely is, isn't it? Because, when we first bump up against, like, you and I seem to have different experiences. Because, yeah, like I think, growing up, I think, I basically learned to keep things hidden and keep things quiet because I didn't have I didn't have very good symbols of clear and open communication around me.
Mm,
So kind of led to me basically just being in my room most of the time, quiet, listening to music and making art. And so I didn't really I didn't have a physical experience, let's say, that there were things in my mind that needed to be exposed. But as it became clear that it actually was that case, there are things in my mind that are making me unhappy and they need to be exposed. The spirit had to be really gentle with me because once I could see there was darkness, it immediately brought up all the shame and guilt and fear. So, yeah, the spirit had to make it really gentle, and, like, I had to be really gentle, and I had to be really prayerful around, like, where can I take this? Where can I take this? Where's a safe place that I can actually take this? Because, like, when we're talking about this, it's not like I've got, like, a history of being a serial killer or something. That's not the kind of darkness we're talking about here. It could be, but it isn't.
mm,
It isn't in my case. But there is, there are it's so individualized, and for me, whatever I felt was dark within my mind, even the like, once I got on this path, even the idea that I liked being alone felt like something I should change. Like, it's not a good piece of my character or something that I like being alone because it means I'm hiding or something. Like, it was like all this twisted stuff I started seeing in my mind that, like you said, there's these beliefs in our minds that just are wrong. Not bad wrong, but wrong in the sense they're making us have incorrect experiences of ourselves. And so, like I said, the spirit needed to be really gentle. And like, initially, for me, it kind of like when I found my place where I could actually expose these things, it had to be in these really, really small increments for me. And it kind of started when I was living in the spiritual community, and we had these sort of expression sessions, is what we would call them. And it was so gentle that there wasn't even any feedback. We would be in this little circle. It was a pretty small group of us, and we would just share really small things. And initially, I didn't at all because I was terrified. I was just listening to everybody else, and I didn't really understand even the reason why they were doing it, especially because there was no feedback. I didn't really get it. It was like people were just putting their darkness into the circle, and I didn't know where it was going from there. I thought it would just stay there because it was being shared, right? Because they were giving voice to it. To me, in my misunderstanding, I thought it was all being made bigger and realer, and now everybody knows about this. And then, as I was kind of sharing my confusion around it, things were getting clearer, and, like, in really small doses, I could put something in the circle for release. And it was really beautiful experience because I would share, or anybody would share, and then there would be a pause. There would be a moment in the circle where everybody was just in prayer and quiet. And it was kind of like this invitation for the spirit, like, for for me it was, here's this thing that upsets me, or it makes me find myself unlovable or hate myself. I'm going to just say this, and I want to give this to the spirit because I don't want to hold it anymore. It's like this thing about this Buddhist saying, right? Like when you're angry with somebody else, it's like as if you're holding a burning piece of coal in your own hand. You're not hurting the other person. You're really just hurting yourself. And that's kind of like what I started really understanding, like all of this stuff in myself that I was judging in any negative way. It was really, really painful. And like you said, like we really have to get to this place where we can see that we don't want this experience anymore. And that's when we're sort of pushed into having to expose and having to share these things. But yeah, just being able to share from this place of I don't want this anymore. It's so unbearably painful. Even if it's the smallest thing, just one little tiny secret, something kept hidden, it doesn't even matter. If there's any like unrest in the mind from it, being able to give it to the spirit from a place of please take this. I don't want to, I don't know how to handle it and I don't want it anymore. Can you show me what's really going on? Can you give me some retranslation? And to be able to just sit in this space of being completely loved. And it was great too in the spiritual community because everybody would share their stuff. And then, we'd be done with our session and we would just go on and have like, work on projects together. And it's like, it wasn't changing anything. So it was like, oh, look at this. Like everyone actually just accepts me. And it doesn't matter that I just shared some secret or shared something that I was ashamed of. It was just a really like the spirit had to be very gentle with me in this and gave me a lot of time to open up and learn that I could trust, like you said, like finding this trust in the spirit that exposing my darkness wasn't going to cause me any like it wasn't making me unsafe. It wasn't making me less loved. It was actually the complete opposite. And yeah, so I think it's just, I think like what I'm sitting in is it's so important. Like when we get on this journey to healing and this journey, towards awakening, that we have to be really prayerful around, specifically where do we take our darkness? And like you said, sometimes it's like it's really just between me and the spirit because there's no one outside of me seemingly that's going to be able to hold the right space for me because I don't want to take the space or I don't want to take these kind of dark thoughts to somebody that's going to just take them at face value and kind of strengthen them by making them real. Like along my path, there were years and years where I didn't share anything with my family because they wouldn't have understood what was going on and it would have made them worry. And, they would have probably wanted to give me advice that wasn't going to be really helpful for me. So it was only years later where I could actually really frankly share some things with my mom and then even with my dad too. And because I was already like on the other side of the healing around the things, that we ended up talking about, like some of my childhood stuff. And I was on the other side of healing all of that stuff. So then I could actually talk with them. But as I was going through all of the healing, I would never have gone to them for kind of help, with these things because I just knew that it wouldn't have really helped the situation and it wouldn't have helped them or me. So yeah, kind of just sharing this idea that it's really important to know where and when you go, to who with these things as you're kind of like trying to figure out like there's stuff in my mind that I can't keep hidden anymore. I want these out.
Yeah, we were having this message of inner truth before the talk
Mm,
that we're doing now, and it was sort of the double meaning and a little bit of a paradox of, we have these things when we get on our path that seem so real and
mm,
so much like this is my truth. Not the truth, but my truth. And it can really be quite something having those so-called inner truths dismantled. And as we talk about almost every time, these relationship dynamics, family, friends, work, religious community, spiritual community, whatever, right? They're often very muddied in our own minds, and they often are the containers where we've got big healing to work through. And so, as you say, it's really a massive part of the healing, as I see it, for most of us, is really, really, as you said, being prayerful for what's the right container. And I was seeing when I was in spiritual community myself, it was very much about like I remember a few times going to the head of the community, that particular site location, and saying, I got this stuff coming up. And the answer was, you got to go sit on the cushion. And there's value in that. And a lot of people will find that that's where they're going to get the healing. But for me at that time, that was not the answer for me. I needed somebody with me. It was too overwhelming to sit on the cushion with some of those thoughts and emotions. So I personally have needed at various points in my journey somebody right by my side, so that if I said, I feel like I want to die, they said, yeah, I've been there. Or if I said, I feel like my skin is on fire from the amount of intensity I'm feeling emotionally about this issue, they'd say, yep, been there. And that was comforting to me. You know, the ego so-called psyche stuff is so much about isolation. It is so much about divide and conquer. And if we need to cordon you off from any sense of connection in any area or every area of your life, that's, yeah, let's go there, says the ego. And so being extricated out of that kind of isolation in the mind is vital. And for many of us that seem to have kind of not nice reflections in our relationships at times, we have to be led to that softer, gentler approach, And I had lots of witnesses I called forth in the early years of, we're going to smack you down. You want to share about how you're feeling? Let me tell you how bad my life was, and I'm going to poop on your story. There were those kinds of reflections that I had that were feeling similar to the reflections that I had in my early years. I didn't feel welcomed. I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel appreciated for my perspective or my approach to things. Right. So I called forth very often in the early days witnesses that were more of the same. And you've mentioned a loving container. I had to work really hard to find those loving containers,
mm,
and I had to work really hard within my mind to stand up to the inner bully in my mind, to stand up in my own mind with a part that was telling me, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not attractive enough, you're not capable enough, you're not any of this, right? I mean, those are the kind of retranslations in the mind of a personality, right? For a
mm,
long time on the journey, we're in our personality more than we're in the spirit. And so the spirit has to address those things that we think are so real and true, these inner truths, right? I think I'm a person in the world, then spirit's got to meet me with reflections about me as a person in the world, right? And we're not talking about some disassociation. Like when we start talking about the spirit moving through us more and more, we're not talking about dissociating. We're talking about the personality starts to be tempered because we keep putting this stuff on the altar or into the fire. I keep seeing the fire ceremonies. I have done so many fire ceremonies because there were times where there was nobody that I could say these things to that was safe for me. My family knows maybe 2% of my spiritual journey. I'm sure most of the stuff that I share is a shock because I had to keep my mouth shut. Love people, you can love them all you want, right? You can have a story of, but these are people that have known me my whole life. I should be able to share it. Well, it doesn't always work that way, right? We have to be going with the spirit to be guided to what's going to be helpful to us. And it's not a judgment about anybody else. It's just about learning with the spirit what the path forward is for you specifically. And so for me, sometimes it looked like support groups in the early years, or it looked like one-on-one kind of person that was my spiritual advisor, or it might have been big seeming energy work healing training programs where I had lots of seeming, participants that were coming in at the same level, right? Sometimes it was my dog, Charlie, confessing to my dog, Charlie. He was a gift of grace that the spirit brought into my life. Unbelievable, unbelievable confidant, unbelievable spiritual support in that little white fuzzy dog, right? So the spirit, as we keep saying, yeah, I really do want to heal this. I really do want to be with you, spirit, more than with these dark thoughts that seem so real and true. Spirit rushes in. I love hearing people's confessions because what it brings in with it is all this grace
Mm.
and all this clarity for me on the so-called receiving end of a confession where it's like, oh my God, this person is in such a state of grace. They are in such loving arms of the spirit. And it lights you up like a light bulb.
Hmm.
When somebody tells me like, oh, I wanted to put a pillow. I had this woman I met in Florida. I was caring with my father for my Nana over a winter. And I met this woman like out of nowhere. And I was saying how I was having a tough time because I'm like in a pressure cooker with my grandmother and my father for a couple months, right? And it was hard. People thought, oh, she's having a vacation in Florida. No, no, no. She's deeply in her healing journey with two reflections of her mind that are big, big energy. And so I met this woman and I was saying how I was having a tough time. And we got very deep very quickly. And she ends up telling me the story about how when she had kids, when they were babies, she regularly went into their bedroom with a pillow in her hand, thinking, am I going to put this pillow over these kids' face today? Because she was maxed out. She had zero energy for dealing with her children. She had so much hatred and rage in her mind at that point that was coming to the surface. And the way she almost went about dealing with it was to put a pillow over this seeming reflection that she thought was her problem. That was an amazing conversation we had, right? And in that moment of hearing her telling the story, I had a Zippo amount of judgment towards her. And I thought, I've never had kids in this life, but boy, do I understand that feeling? You betcha.
Hmm.
I could completely relate. 100%. Have I done that to anybody in this life? No, I have not. But could I relate to that feeling and that belief in my mind that something outside of me was my problem and maybe I could make it go away by doing something out there in the world over and over again? So this idea of confession becomes this gateway that the spirit uses to like pummel us with grace, pummel us with love, and show us these thoughts you're having, they're not personal. They're in the mind. Everybody's got some version of them. You're not a bad, sinful, awful person. You're just confused. Ah, you hear it enough. You see it enough. You let the spirit guide you to enough places where that's revealed to you. You start to go, oh, I see what you're saying. I get it. And then when somebody comes with another dark story about how, maybe it will be a serial killer that comes. Maybe it will be. I mean, I've had people walk by me and spirit has said that person's playing out the pedophile story. I had no judgment in that moment because I was with the spirit over it, right? So the spirit has a different way of communicating these stories that we would judge as dark and harsh and whatever, right? But the spirit's got a different dance it's doing for us. And it's quite mysterious and quite amazing. And yeah, just full of grace.
Yeah, that's a beautiful reminder. Yeah, I think we're probably leaning towards the end here, but
Mm-hmm.
I think, it's just like part of what you're saying is like this kind of like encouragement, like yeah, it can look really difficult on this journey and it can seem really dark on this journey sometimes. But I think for both of us, we've seen over and over again that the spirit does take care of us. And if we're really open, we will find the right place to be at the right time. And yeah, find those companions that really can support us on this journey, because it can seem really lonely sometimes. And even if we're guided to be by ourselves and just with the spirit, we'll also be shown then the right way to go about exposing this darkness. And yeah, sometimes it is just, in the bathtub crying. I've been there. Just kind of being in this
Uh-huh.
warm womb-like structure, just crying because I don't know, some memory of childhood was coming up or whatever, whatever it is. And but I think the bottom line is like just starting to acknowledge that there are things in our minds that really, really are calling for healing and calling for a loving reflection, a loving retranslation. And I think all we're saying is there's always a loving reflection somewhere, even if it's just with the spirit in our own minds. It's nice when there can be outside reflections, and I love those, and I love being that reflection myself as well. Like you said, when somebody comes to me and exposes stuff with me, it's like there's something really powerful about being able to share space with somebody that is able to just get the crap out of their minds for the moment, and to be able to be there and just really experience the loving space that can be there, the loving space that is the spirit. So yeah, I think yeah, it's encouraging to hear other people's stories. So whatever avenues anybody can find that might listen to this, to feel safe enough to heal this darkness in the mind, go for it. If it's AA, or if it's some kind of support group, or if it's talking with a therapist or whatever it might look like, go find it. It's really worth it. There's so much space that just wants to be freed up in our minds so we can really be this channel for the spirit and be this light in the world. So yeah, I think that's,
Yeah.
yeah. You got anything else?
No, it's a big hallelujah.
Yeah, right. I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There's another way,
Mm,
and there's a way through, and
yes.
the gifts are waiting to be delivered. So come along.
Yes. Exactly. Great. Well, thank you, Elizabeth, and thanks to anybody who is listening. And we'll see you
Yes.
next time.
Bye for now.
Bye for now.
The darkness of